All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Gaurav Bakshi, and I welcome you all to the second edition of Strat-Chat. And as some of you may know earlier, when we started doing Strat-Chat, we were essentially talking to HR folks and getting their stories to surface, getting their perspectives on managing people. But this season is ultra special because we are now getting in entrepreneurs and people who've actually started out on their own, started to build organizations and scale them up, and very, very glad to welcome you, Aditya and Vishay, on our first episode of Strat-Chat Season 2. As I would say, fellow entrepreneurs who are out there killing it. And I think it's been a 3 year journey for you. So, really
Yeah.
looking forward to this conversation here.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. Thank you for having us. I think so. This is not the kind of conversation we have every day, right? As in our conversations usually are very focused on the marketing side of things, but this should be interesting. I think these are rare
I'm
occasions where we
sure.
get to talk
I'm sure.
about this. Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I'm sure. So, I think Enso, it's a beautiful name. Why don't we talk a little about why Enso? And what
So
is it
very
that you wish to drive with Enso?
very simple reason. There's a Japanese whiskey called Enso, which we both really like, and hence the name.
So
No, but
it's not
that's
to do
not
with the
really.
circle of life and the togetherness in
No, I was just kidding. That's not the case. We discovered that there was a Japanese whiskey after we formed the company. But
right.
when we were trying to figure out the name of the organization at that point in time, I think one of the things about this Zen Buddhist concept of Enso really kind of resonated with us, right? So fundamentally, there's a practice where monks are told every day in the morning to get up and start forming these incomplete circles. They're supposed to be done with a single brush stroke, right? And that's in a way getting them to 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 aspire for perfection, but never really get there, right? Because of the nature of the practice itself. So I think that's something that was where we kind of found an anchor as far as the name of the business was concerned. And plus, there are also larger aspects to what it means in the Zen Buddhist space. But I think this is the one holding piece which really resonated. So hence the name.
Okay.
And a
Circle
couple
never
of years
completes,
later, we
basically.
discovered, yeah, and in one of our meetings in Goa, when we were there, we walked into a store and we found this bottle of Enso whiskey, right? So we were like, okay, other people have also thought about this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I'm sure. It's beautiful, right? I mean, and that's sometimes when you feel that that circle of life is actually coming back, and maybe the universe is one way of giving you a signal that you're doing the right thing, perhaps. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, but I know you go back, you guys go many years
yeah,
back. Well, while Enso is
yeah,
is 3 years now, 3 years young, I would say. But you have a long-standing relationship, I think, to early years of your career. So,
yeah.
tell me more about a lot of times, and why I'm asking you this question is that we end up meeting a lot of entrepreneurs who are solo, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's quite lonely at the top, right? I mean, putting an organization together and running it
Yeah.
successfully, it can be a lonely journey if you're alone. And if you
Yeah.
have a good partner, it makes a whole lot of a difference. So how did it kick off between the two of you? And let's talk a little about that as well.
It's very interesting, right? And so we were, like you mentioned, we were management trainees together right out of B school, right? So and Vishay obviously has prior experience. That was the first time I started working out of B school. So same standard stint. So sales, marketing, rural stints, etc., etc. We got into field sales. We were part of the same team there as well. So we were part of the same North Zone team under the same leadership. So we had a relationship there. But then we went our separate ways. I shifted to GSK, which I continued with Dabur. And then our paths kind of crossed back again around 2017, 2018, when he shifted back to Gurgaon. And after a couple of other stints after Dabur, he was looking to do something on his own, right? So he reached out, came over, and there was no formal relationship at that point in time, right? So it was basically just bouncing off ideas with each other. And at that point in time, I was running a D2C brand on my own, which I started in 2015 with somebody else. And as things turn out, end of 2019, and with no understanding that a lockdown was looming, we kind of decided to start this, right? And I think one of the cores, and like you mentioned, right? So I completely agree. I think at least I would not start a company on my own, as in I wouldn't do it without a co-founder. And one of the things which is really important for me as far as having the right co-founder is concerned, is this fundamental level of trust, right? I keep saying this to people that in my life there are few people with whom I have like blind trust, right? And Vishay is one of them. Uh, where if Vishay tells me to jump, I jump, right? And this is how it is. And I think the feeling is mutual, right? And that
Yeah, sure.
which is why we've been doing this together, right? So I think that's core and that's critical. Plus,
Mm.
also when building a business, right, there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of times where uh, you really don't know the answers, right? You are stuck in situations where, and it is frustrating, right? It's not that simple. And so is the job, but uh, in an organization where you are leading the organization, even though you might not know the answer, but at least you have to ensure that you give that sense of calm to the team, right? That we'll figure this out, right? And that is when you lean on each other.
Mm.
So yeah, we have a ton of these conversations, right? Where we are stuck on certain common issues and stuff like that. So it's interesting. And plus also another thing which works is that because there is this personal relationship, so the extended family as well, right? So there are people in the family which for whom this business is also uh, they treat it like their own, right? So for example, Vishay's wife Radhika, she works in HR, right? And she's our so since we don't have an HR function, she's our de facto guide for all things HR, right? So is my mother. My mother is also in HR. So we kind of lean on their support as well. So this infrastructure overall, the entire support system that we have really works. And that's primarily driven because the relationship is based on trust. And that makes a
Mm.
huge difference.
Mm.
Yeah, but
Sure.
we had an interesting start, right? So, like you mentioned, so
Yeah.
we had a similar journeys together, right? Uh, okay, after Dabar, he moved to GSK and worked there till about 2015. I worked in Dabar till 14, and then I moved to Goa Vivo. I think 15 is when we both started our entrepreneurship, right? He founded
Yeah.
his company with his partner, which was into sports e-commerce. I
Mm-hmm.
started a company which was an e-pharmacy. Again, ran that for a couple of years, and that's when I moved to Gurgaon. And before that, it was not even like we were good friends or anything, right?
Yeah.
We were more acquaintances, or we'll say hi to each other socially and just talk business if we would ever, right?
Mm.
But
Mm. Mm.
but then there's something about people who are doing their own stuff that helps them bond, right? That is probably
Yeah.
what helped us bond, right? I met him in Gurgaon. What are you doing? I want to understand what, because I'm exploring, I'm open, what I have
Mm.
to do in life, right? And they were doing well on Amazon, Flipkarts. They started their own website. I said, okay, let me learn Amazon there. What is there to it? That's how it started. He got me my first client. I started consulting. Then there was a time where I was practically sitting out of his office, right? And that's where the relationship developed. Because
Mm.
if you ask any of our common circle or friends, how did you end up getting together? No one will believe
Yeah.
it, right? But now, obviously, it's, something is destiny, right? So we don't know. But yeah,
Yeah.
fortunately, things worked out well. And after 3 years of being talking to each other is when we actually started. And so it's not like within
Oh,
6 months everything clicked and
so
all that.
there's
Yeah.
a
So
big
in fact,
big prelude as well.
yeah, after I
Yeah.
moved to Bangalore is when we started. And so I was not even
Oh,
in Gurgaon when we talked about it.
sure,
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah,
sure.
so yeah, interesting stuff.
See, also another thing which happens, which is super interesting, is that the moment you switch out of a corporate job, right, and you start something on your own, all your past relationships with either B school friends or colleagues, they kind of become slightly difficult to manage, right? Because a lot of times, conversations with colleagues and people whom you've known from B school, etc., are all very centered around the job, right? Conversations about office politics, etc. And somehow, when
Mm.
you step out of it, and I'm sure this must have happened with you as well, right? Once you've been
Yeah,
running your own,
absolutely.
this that connection just doesn't fit, right? And you find those conversations so mundane, right? That this person said this in office, and here while you're wondering how you're going to pay salaries in the next month, right? So the paradigm is so different, and hence you could, what like Vishay was saying, you start leaning and start interacting more with people who have a similarish kind of journey.
Right.
So that also helps in that
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But tell me, how are you guys in terms of your own styles of working, right? I mean, is there a lot of complementarity, polarity, you know? And so, basis your own working styles and what I'm sure each of you brings a very distinctive strength on the table, and how does it fit into the whole ecosystem, and what does it mean for your team? Because you know, how do you divide work basis that? So let's talk a little about that.
Yeah. So,
So one of our clients, okay,
yeah.
it happens with us often, right? So she messages him the same thing, she messages me the same thing. What is your point of view? And 80% of the times, the point of views are dramatically opposite, especially in one or two business cases where she also knows that they'll have different point of views. And then she tells us, I knew you would say something else, you would say something else, right? So it's not we argue, we debate, right? We don't always agree on something. But I think that's what even clients appreciate, where we have a point of view, right? In life, generally, we believe you should have some point of view towards a thing, then only you can make a difference, or you have at least thought about it. Otherwise, there's no point, right? So yes, drastically different personalities, but yeah,
Poles apart, dramatically different. So, and which works for us, I think. And again, right, I just keep going back to the same thing, uh, because there is such implicit trust, you can survive in a situation like that, right? As in nobody is doubting intent, nobody is questioning intent, and there is complete clarity that even if we don't agree on something, it's all being done for the larger good.
Absolutely. That's the magic.
And which is what you need, right? Yeah, and you don't need two people who agree, right? Then how do you grow? Then where is the other point of view coming from?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, as far as there is trust and there is, I would say, belief in each other, and the larger context of being, it's okay to, you can agree to disagree, and that's fine, and not take it, in another context. I think that just keeps the equilibrium fine. Okay, now let's talk more about what you're building, right? And I know, and you know, I've personally seen in the last few years how you guys are shaping up the team, and adding a lot of people. What's your philosophy? I mean, if in HR, I mean, if in one word, if in one line, if I usually define HR, it's about getting in the best people, getting them to succeed, and getting them to stay. And so let me ask the first question from a team perspective of, how do you get in the best people? Do you get in the best people, right? What's your philosophy on people, right? Because there's a lot of talent out there, and how do you pick your choice?
So it's a tough one, right? I think building a good quality team, I think, is the single biggest determinant in business success, right? If you're able to do that, everything else kind of falls in place. And obviously, you have to be in an industry where there is some sort of growth upside, right? As in, you can't be being part of that industry. But uh, uh, honestly, if you ask us, do we have the answer or the formula 100% there? I don't think we do, and there is a journey, right? And we've also kind of learned along the way. But we over-index on a couple of things when we are looking at hiring, right? So number one, we over-index on intent, right? People who demonstrate or who have demonstrated intent in their lives, right? I think that's something that we over-index on. The second is over-indexing on aptitude versus functional capability, right? So if there is holistic aptitude and if there is high intent, right, I can build functional capability, right? So in principle, that's what we try to do, right? There are times we succeed, there are times we don't, and but that's something that we're kind of learning and evolving, right? And it's a challenge, right? You basically interact with a person for a couple of hours, 3 hours at max, right? And you're basically making a decision which is equivalent to a marriage, right? And so it's a tough one. And, but yeah, I think the idea is that over time we kind of fine tune our ways of understanding these two things better. I think aptitude is easier to do, right? And you can have certain tests and questionnaires which you can roll out to just get general aptitude. But the intent is a tough one. And there are certain markers that you will find, right? So for example, one of the things which we look at is academic performance, right? Now,
Right.
while academic performance is not an indicator of success in life, it's an indicator of the input which goes in, because the Indian education system requires that you learn and you rote learn, which requires you
Right.
to put in effort. It's as simple as that,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's a indicator that the person does that. Or for example, in an extracurricular activity, right? People will say that I love, most common answers are writing, traveling, and I don't know, something else, right? So reading, writing, traveling, right? Now, the moment you start probing those questions, okay, if you really enjoy traveling, how many times have you actually done that, right? So those are indicators that the person
Hmm.
is demonstrating intent, and it could be anything, right? A person, if, I don't know, just plays the guitar, right? But how many hours do you practice? As in, what all have you learned? As in, those are all indicators of intent. So those are the things that we try to
Right.
grapple with and somehow find answers in those kind of places.
And yes, it
It,
has
it's
evolved, right? Like you said, getting the best talent, right? Initially, when we started, that was not a choice.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
best talent, right? So we started grooming up talent internally, right? They were not
yeah,
what are they defining now, right? That's the definition now.
yeah,
But yes,
yeah,
again, we looked at what background that person came from and where he or she has reached. If they have achieved something today from where they started, they probably have a fighting spirit, right? So things like
hmm.
that, right? Will they come up the curve? And we invested behind those
Hmm.
people, and those people tend to grow and stick with you in the organization, right?
yeah, yeah,
Best talent, you may not always, there are too many drivers and too many
No,
opportunities,
it's
right?
very heartening to hear how you guys have been picking up people, because a lot of times the general perception is that you essentially, most clients would come to us and say, okay, we need people who can hit the ground running, or somebody who's only done it in the past can do it now. And it's a refreshing change when I
yeah,
hear you say that you're hiring for intent, and you're hiring for aptitude, and you're hiring for that grit and that ability to learn. And you know I think that's a clear distinction of you putting your neck out there and say, okay, I'm willing to invest in you, and make you turn capable. And I think that should go a long way, and that will keep you away from perhaps all the unnecessary war that keeps happening just basis a skill which can be picked up in a couple of weeks time. Right.
yeah,
So I think that's really good.
yeah. No,
But
and I think
tell me, I
this
mean,
is
yeah, go on, please. Yeah.
so this is very important for our industry also specifically, right? And you're absolutely right. As in, if I would hire for current capability today, right? As in, I would assume that people know what is being done and what is required today. Our industry evolves very, very quickly, right? So the shelf life of today's skills is so small that a platform like Meta would roll out a new feature and suddenly everything would change, right? So our industry requires that. And if you've just learned certain skills without having the aptitude to support or the understanding as to why that matters, the upskilling will become practically impossible. And it's a need for us more than anything else because of the nature of our industry. As in, that industry itself is so dynamic.
Right, right. So, yeah, absolutely. So, but what's been the experience? I mean, especially the guys who joined you initially. I mean, have people stayed back, and how is the journey been? Has the team blossomed under you in the last 3 years? How's that going?
We would hope that they feel that they have blossomed under us, right? But wrong people to answer that question. But yeah, as in,
Right,
so uh, we've had people who've been with us since day one, and till now, very few people have quit for other opportunities. It's a rare occurrence, touchwood, and I think that's one thing that we're really proud of, right? As in, very few people have come and said that we've got a better job and hence we are going. And there are cases where that has happened, and the change has been so drastic, right? As in, for example, very recently, somebody in the analytics team got an offer which was significantly different from what he was getting up, what he was doing with us, right? And
right.
not just monetarily, just the nature of the role. And we encourage that, right? That no, this is an opportunity you shouldn't be missing for your
Should
career
go
overall,
for,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
Yeah, but having said that, as in there are guys, and so guys like you guys wouldn't interact with them ever because they've been with us since day one. Like guys like Satwan, guys like Nitesh, they've been with us from day one, right, and very early on. And yeah, and over the course of their journeys, they started out as junior resources. They are in leadership roles now. So yeah, it's
Phenomenal.
yeah,
The
it's,
first guy, in fact, was not even in Enso. So it was,
yeah.
even before the company I used to run, he was there for about 2 years. And then when we formed Enso, it's still there, right? So
Longer journey. Longer journey.
Yeah.
Great. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk a little about the culture and the policy, the framework. I mean, often organizations want to stay nimble, but yet you need some architecture. You need some form and shape as the team starts to grow. So as you are on this verge of, I would say not really on a verge, but you guys have been growing consistently. But as the team continues to grow, what are some of the philosophies which you think you would want to keep sacrosanct, and what are some of the views around some of the people stuff? You know, I mean, and when I'm saying this, I mean, there are all sorts of things happening in the market since the time,
Mm.
especially hybrid came in, and the expectations have changed. So,
Yeah.
eager to know some of the thoughts of how are you making it a place people want to, people are happy in, rather.
So it's very simple, right? And we like to keep it simple, and it just saves a lot of mental angst and effort as well, and which is why this works, right? So what we did early on was that we documented what we call our culture book, right? It's a very simple document. It's like what 10, 12 slider, nothing elaborate, but where we put down something which was which we call our 5 core principles, right? So there's stuff like customer focus, there's stuff like integrity, trust, respect, accountability, right? And all decision making that happens stems from those, right? So I noticed the questions that had come in as a precursor to the conversation. There was something that, and there's a slide in that which says that we don't have a policy, right? So it says no policy is our policy, right? But there's a precursor to that, right? So the way people are told, or the expected behavior, and which we also try to demonstrate, right? Because culture essentially is a function of what people do versus what you say, right? And so the way this works is that we say that there has to be responsibility and accountability, right? And there's a nuance between the two. A person who's
Hmm.
responsible can finish off a task list without taking any accountability for outcome, right? And hence these two, right? While they may seem very similar, but there is a major nuance difference between the two. So if fundamentally there are people who behave responsibly and who are accountable, right? Then I don't need to follow through with a lot of things, right? Obviously, we are compliant with the law of the land, right? While you have to declare a certain number of restricted holidays a year, etc., we do all that, right? But beyond that, I don't want to be in a situation where somebody has to come and tell me that, oh, I have taken 2 leaves, and if I take one more, you'll cut 1 day of salary.
Hmm.
I don't want to do that, right? So the first principle that we outline is customer success, right?
Hmm.
So you know what customer success means. You are expected to behave with a certain sense of responsibility, and you're expected to have accountability, right? The moment these three things work together, it takes away a lot of the burden of the rest of the stuff, which essentially are processes which are created to
Hmm.
get people to do these things, right? The starting premise behind a, a policy, right, which is prescriptive behavior, is that people will not behave responsibly, and hence we need to do it, right? So in the hybrid work environment also, there are a lot of cases where people are clocking in. So there are softwares available where when you
Yeah.
log in, they
We, we,
start
we we
tracking your
get
day,
special
right?
requests from clients all the time. Everybody is asking for such softwares these days.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to work in a company which does that, and I certainly don't want to run a company which does that.
the
No,
premise of
actually,
building this company is trust, right? And
Yeah.
if you can trust your people, right? And it's a remote working. We're not even hybrid that we are telling people to come to office right now, right? If someone has to not comply, right? And we all have worked in organizations, we've all worked in remote setups. You can do whatever you want to do, right? And you can still demonstrate that you are active. Right? So the premise is trust, right? Eventually, someday you will know, right? But people should fundamentally believe that we trust them and they should be able to reach out to us, right? If they're not able to reach out us, where is the feedback mechanism or what are we, right? So we are being flexible. And the idea is let's work on trust towards that common goal and demonstrate that behavior, and culture will take care of it. And hence hiring also with those kind of people, trying to find the right fits within the culture is very important.
Sure, sure, sure. No, it's very, very good. I think it's a good thing to have. I mean, as far as people understand the philosophy and get rooted to the
Yeah.
core, these principles that you've set out, I think it's all good. I think, but there's a lot of communication and a lot of conversations which create that sense of complete understanding of the organization and the fabric that you're really trying to build. I think, and I think
Yeah.
that's something similar. I mean, we also adopt here, and clearly, I mean, there is a big win in letting it in the hands of people and letting them know you really trust them, and that creates bonds which actually last forever, right? So, clearly, I think it's a very good strategy for you to keep. But tell me, I mean, on the premise of this strategy and on the premise that you sometimes are getting in people who may take some time to get up and perform to your level of expectations, because you may be hiring them, like you said, for their intent and general capability versus a skill. So typically, I mean, in terms of managing performance, what are some of your mantras there? How do you ensure high quality work uh, done in line with the commitments of the client? And how do you yet ensure that uh, people are getting enough feedback, and those who are not sort of getting there on time? So how do you handle the entire maze, right? Because uh, it will lead to, I'm sure there will be some times when people will still fall short given whatever you are doing for them.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
your approach there?
So 2, 3 things. I think firstly, the transition to whenever we hire laterally, right? The transition takes a bit of time, right? Because this is fundamentally very different, right? Because nobody is asking you anything, as in uh, you are supposed to be responsible. So people take a little bit of time to get used to our way of working, right? Because inherently you're coming from an organizational structure which is operating on trust deficit, right? As in that's how organizations are built, right? And unlike us, where you have to behave differently, so it takes a little bit of time. So that's one part of the cultural alignment which needs to happen for people, right? And there I think the way we kind of like to do this is that people who've been with us from the beginning, right, they become the torchbearers of culture, right? So it's very simple, right? If somebody is coming to visit you, and if somebody is new in your situation, you are supposed to be the one who's supposed to make the person comfortable, right? And that is how the transition gets managed, right? So that's one. Other than that, our assessment process has been also fairly simple, right? As in, and the way we have to define assessments, right? Because people have to fall under an assessment structure.
Right.
That assessment structure also determines monetary compensation increases, right? So we do that, but that's based on behavior versus result output, right? And there is a certain so the 5-point scale, because that's the simplest way to classify people, is based on behavior. You are expected to demonstrate
Right.
certain behaviors, and if you demonstrate these behaviors, this is the rating, and hence so on and so forth, right? uh, there is a regular mechanism where these inputs are shared, right? And now the structure has become that there's at least a two-layered structure, as in between the founders and actually it's potentially 2.5, because if you just consider interns as well, that's another half layer added. So that structure exists, but those conversations are fairly frequent, right? And the output of those conversations lead to two things. So number one, if there are functional gaps which are identified, then it leads to, okay, you need to learn this skill, and either you will be taught that skill by somebody internally, or you can look at external resources where you could just take a course, right? You would do that.
Right.
That's one part of capability building, right? The other side of capability building, which I think gives you better ROI, is putting people in situations which make them slightly uncomfortable, right? Just letting them punch above their weights slightly. Right? So you give them that opportunity, and you'll find that people, and not all, but some will rise to the challenge, right? Even people who don't, they will stretch enough that at the end of it, they'll be ahead of where they were. So we try to
Correct.
find the balance between these two, and and try to maintain as much structure in the conversations as possible, right? And I think working with large companies at least gives you these things, right? So in GSK, there used to be this process which was called a talent review, which was different from your annual appraisal, right? So talent
Right.
review was basically plotting people on performance and the potential. But the talent review was subjective, but the manager was supposed to give you specific instances. Right. So we try to bring that kind of objectivity to the conversations as well. And again, like we are also learning on the fly, right? And I'm sure that things will evolve as we also get more people on the team and as the team grows.
Yeah, I think you see, HR is no rocket science, right? It's ultimately it's about people, and it's fairly commonsensical, and you just have to have your heart in the right place, and knowing that what you're doing is consciously right for you and your team, and I think that's what really makes the big difference, right? So I think as far as you're conscious of giving people opportunities to, I really like what you said in terms of just giving them an opportunity to strive a little more and a little more. I think that's it. A lot of times, especially younger talent, which is maybe few years out of college and starting their career, a lot of times people leave organizations because nobody cares for what they are doing beyond what they've been hired for. So, if I am doing, let's say, graphic design in your context, I mean, we know people who've only been doing social media design forever, and nobody is actually invested in them to say, okay, what can you do? Can you do video? Can you do film? Can you do something else? And that's where the ball stops rolling. So I think that's a very pertinent way to look at it. One question, also which I have is that as a startup, you can't pay in top quartile, in terms of compensation and stuff, but you still need to hold on to people, and at least the good ones who are doing well, and you want to keep them commercially comfortable as well, if I can say. So how do you approach this reality of and why I'm asking you this question is that we meet a lot of talent, and there are times when people know they want to join startups, and there are times when people know that they are only looking at bigger brands and larger organizations because they value the frills and so many other perks that come with it. But how do you make those dots connect? What's your proposition or thinking?
It's very simple, right? As in, so two situations: internal talent or when we are hiring, right? When we are hiring, there is an understanding of where the industry is at, right? And in case there is value to the talent, then within what I would call fair levels of increases in salary, we are fairly flexible that way, right? As in, it's not, as in, I certainly wouldn't want to hire somebody who comes and thinks that they were shortchanged, right? But but both of us are not in a of the belief that the way a lot of startups, especially startups which have raised capital very early on, the way there have been increases in salary, I don't think a lot of them are justified. right? So we have to live with
Correct.
that reality, right?
Correct.
As in, I don't think a data analyst with 1 year work experience should be getting 30 lakh rupees, right? As in just, and it's just the value that you will extract from the person is not going to be, and I'm sure the person deserves it, right? And deserves even more.
Right.
But in our case,
Right.
it just doesn't work, right? So we are limited by that, right? Secondly, ours is a business where it's not a funded business, right? It's a service business fundamentally,
Absolutely.
and
Organically growing and yeah.
organically growing. Our financials at the end of the year basically determine what is the pot which is available, which we can pass on to the team, right? And that pot is just split. It's as simple. It's just financial maths, right? And I can't do anything beyond that. As in both of us, as in where there's no other money available on the table. This is the money that we make is the money which is on the table. And if someone is not happy with it, then there's not much I can do. It's
Right.
as simple as that. It's a very mathematical thing, right? As in today's salary cost is X, our business has grown by Y. And
Yeah.
what we definitely ensure is that we over-index there, right? If salary cost was X and business grew by Y, our salary cost next year would be not just Y, but Y plus something, right? We do that, right? But
And
the
there is a
math,
lot of
Transparent about
conversation
what
that
we are offering,
happens.
right?
yeah,
And you talk a lot about, overall business outcomes with the larger team and, how are you guys performing?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
so
so
there
that
is
transparency is
there is
completely there, right? What turnover did we do last year, right? This is what we are aiming to get next year, right? If we go above it, this is the possible pot that can be split between the X people and who are eligible for it. So those things are pretty
Right.
transparent as well, right?
yeah.
Sounds really cool. Anything else, because you are, a lot of your folks are working remotely, and in fact, the two of you happen to be in different cities. How do you connect? I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of phone calls and meetings and Zoom, etc. But do you find ways and means to, create that sort of closeness within the team and stuff?
Yeah. So,
We did our first conference last year in November. So that was the first time
Yeah.
even we saw a lot of people. So that's how we
Yeah.
started. And we intend to
Sure,
make it
that must
at
have brought a
least
lot of
an
buzz.
annual affair. Yeah,
Mm.
so there actually people got to know each other and bonded. And then obviously after that, we've seen a lot of difference in terms of how the team gels, right? Till that time, you were a person or a voice over a phone or a video, right? But that changed significantly after that meeting.
Like other than that, me and Vishay we are going for a business meeting to Pune, right? And there are a few people in Pune, there are a few people in Bombay. So we'll just ensure that all of them
You
come
go
together
catch up.
and we'll do a meet. Yeah, we'll catch up, right? Other than that, every Friday, the week ends with a team call, which is a non-business
Oh,
call,
nice.
right? And that's something that
That's
we try to
beautiful.
do. And there's no business conversation. There's just people catching up randomly, and half the time the conversation is about what to do over the weekend or what movies to watch, right? And yeah, stuff like that. And then whenever opportunity presents itself, as in, the intent is always to meet people, right? Wherever, if we are traveling, if they are coming here, etc., etc. Like last year, I think
Sounds
I was
good.
in Bangalore, and a couple of people in Bangalore, they came over to Vishay's house, and we had dinner together. So stuff like that. Those are things that we do.
So I think all boxes ticked. Yeah, in the last few minutes we've talked about all the core aspects which make a good organization, and you guys are ticking all the boxes. So I wish you great luck. Before we sign off this conversation, any shout out, any message to fellow entrepreneurs like yourselves or those who are just about making a beginning, in terms of setting up a successful organization. What's the message you'd want to give them?
I think it's a tough thing to do, right? And I think when I started, personally for me, I didn't understand what it meant and what it would take out of me, right? And it's tougher than anybody has ever told you, or it's tougher than what you can imagine for yourself, right? takes a lot out, right? But so I am very, I just tell people that you have to kind of be very circumspect before you make the decision, right? So the story that you will be acquired and you'll walk away with a pot of gold is all fine, right? But it's a tough journey, right? And we deal with a lot of startup founders, right? And we see them grinding day in day out, right? So you have to be mentally prepared there. What at least both of us try to do is wherever possible, we kind of just try to help out people as much as possible. And I'm very happy to have conversations with anybody in the ecosystem who is just looking to just ask a couple of questions as well, right? Maybe I might know the answer, maybe I wouldn't, right? But I would always approach that conversation with empathy and just try to figure out a way to possibly help the person, because I understand how hard the journey is.
Right.
So yeah, just like lean on people, just create an ecosystem of support. I think that's very critical.
Great. Vishay, anything from you?
Right, like he said, it's tough, right? But it's rewarding also, is what I feel. It's satisfying, right? You can do a job and earn money, right? If money was the only driving factor, then probably most people would not start as entrepreneurs or continue doing it for a longer time, right? So it is what you are creating, right, is important. Are you able to give something to people that makes them better people, whether your employees, your partners, if you're helping grow them business, right? So when are we most happy, or even our team, right? If someone does really well in the business or as an individual, right? That joy, because you were part of that journey, is really important for me as an individual. And it feels good that you could contribute to that, right? And I think fundamentally, I believe there's a lot of mistrust in the entire ecosystem, whether it's agencies, whether the people you are working with, employees you are working with, or how the economy is evolving, but the trust is lacking, right? Even in brands advertising, trust is lacking. We want to bridge that gap simply. If you work with us, at least we want them to believe they can trust us, and we'll demonstrate that. And then things may go good, bad, whatever, but then you are together in that journey and you believe they are doing their best. I think if your principles and conscience is clear, then probably things will go in the right place over a period of time.
No, absolutely. Very well captured, Vishay. I think this is the one thing we also aspire to do all the time, that people we work with on any side of the table or generally in the community, I think these have to be relationships which can bear all storms and bear everything. And if I tell someone that, okay, listen, we've been trying, but this is gonna take time, you need to believe us. And it's a very different way of building business relationships. And I think those people like yourselves, and based on the same philosophy, I think there are enough like-minded people who are looking for similar approach, similar credibility, similar faith. And while I resonate with what you're saying, Vishay, a lot of people trying to shortchange in different ways in terms of business, but I think enough and more people realizing the need for greater genuinity of heart and mind and speech, and really walking the talk kind of context. So great. I wish you, it's been a wonderful conversation, very refreshing to hear some of your views, and I'm sure some of our audience will also take away a few good nuggets out of this. I wish you and Team Enso a super duper next financial year, and maybe many years beyond that. So thank you so much for taking all the time.
Thank you so much for having us.
It was wonderful chatting.
Yeah.
Thank you.